Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining. My name is Grace Tortorella, and I'm the Executive Director of UGA Miracle.
And I'm Virginia Miller, and I'm the finance director this year.
Today we're going to be presenting on rethinking tradition and building a new event experience. We are going to be going over how UGA Miracle rebuilt the structure of our dance marathon event with the help of advisors and the sprint model. We'll start with a little introduction, go over the sprint model, and then let you know what we realized about our past events, how we made changes, and what our results looked like. To just give you some background, in the past year, like I mentioned, we restructured the entire format of our dance marathon and we went from a 24-hour event to a 13-hour event. And it mainly just focused on our dance marathon, and the goal is to make it more efficient and successful overall, fundraising wise and with participant experience. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is our sprint model. On the bottom row, you'll see the sprint planning method, which is what we followed to rebuild our event experience. It started with identifying activities that will be engaging for our participants and make the overall event enjoyable. We determined how long those events would take, added up the overall time for those events, and then created the structure of our dance marathon.
Okay, so now we're going to go over some of the findings that we realized when we looked at our past event experience and what we saw as essential when building our new event experience. So, in our previous program model for honestly the entire year, we focused a lot on year-long engagement, and this looked like an onboarding in the fall and fundraising year-round. We did a really big recruitment push at the very beginning of the year, and there wasn't really any recruitment push after that. We also prioritized fundraising very early and very often. We have two major fundraising pushes at the beginning of the year, and those were the ones that we focused on the most in this previous program model. And with these things, we realized that our participants were experiencing a lot of burnout. There was a lot of people who were getting tired with the early recruitment and with the early fundraising, and they were getting tired by the time our main event rolled around in the spring. So, with this burnout and disappointment that we were getting from even our most dedicated participants, people were also losing excitement for future dance marathons. We noticed this as a problem because at the end of the year, people wouldn't be excited for our next dance marathon. Our retention rate for people joining Miracle who were there the year prior to the next year was decreasing year after year. We also noticed that there was a lack of urgency around Dance Marathon with our previous program model. People weren't excited when Dance Marathon came around. People weren't preparing for it. People stopped showing up to their committee meetings before Dance Marathon. We noticed that there was just a decline in participation as the year went on. We also noticed around University of Georgia's campus that they were tuning out our program. People used to be really excited about it, and suddenly people weren't as excited about it anymore. Less press, less excitement, less general people coming to our event was all things that we were noticing. We did have success on our push days in our previous program model, but we didn't have a lot of participant activity outside of those days, which was a huge problem for our event, and we weren't following the sprint model at all. So at Dance Marathon 2024 for us, we raised over $189,000 between the hours of 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. We then noticed that we raised only $5,000 from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., which were our overnight hours in our 26-hour dance marathon model. There were a lot of reasons for this, but mainly just because the people who donated to our participants were asleep and not fundraising. So these hours didn't make much sense for us to keep around in our dance marathon, which was something we really looked at. We also looked at in our dance marathon, besides fundraising, we had a lot of over programming. There was a lot of unnecessary hours that were spent at dance marathon, either transitioning or we were filling them with mindless activities that maybe were exciting at the time, but we were looking into if they were really essential to our program model. We also saw that with this 26-hour model, participants were leaving a few hours into the dance marathon, which honestly wasn't helpful for us for our fundraising or for our participant engagement. So there were a lot of things that we looked at when moving from the 26-hour model to the 13-hour model.
With that, we decided it was time to make a change in our overall dance marathon structure and the way that we plan our year. So, to do so, we put together the Dance Marathon Planning Committee. This consisted of our executive director, finance director, program director, internal director, pretty much our whole executive council, along with advisors. And we decided at first what our major components of our event were. So we had people from all different parts of our organization who had different perspectives, which is super important when putting together a committee because you don't want people who only know about the numbers or only thinking about family stories or morale dance. So you really need to have everyone on board to take hold of their own positions and advocate for themselves in areas of your program. Every program is different, so when you're thinking about this, you might see some major components that you also have, and you might see some that you aren't as integral to your program success and tradition over the year. Tradition is something that we really struggled with. We really worried about, well, 24 hours, that's what dance marathon is, like, or 26, however long your programs might be. And people are often really hesitant to make these changes, but we'll show you how they ended up being successful for us. So we really just started back to basics. So for the first one, it was opening and closing ceremonies. So on the left side, you'll see the actual components, and on the right side, you'll see the time that it took for each component. There's a couple you'll notice don't have a time next to them, such as fundraising pushes, morale dance, and meals. That's because while we were planning, we weren't sure how long our dance was going to be. Meals are very hard to plan out because we weren't sure what our flow would look like yet, how many meals we were going to have. So while this committee was in action, we were in the very early stages of our planning process because obviously we didn't know how long our event would be. So we didn't have all of these things nailed down, which ended up being okay. So if you're thinking this sounds like a lot right now, don't freak out. But we decided that we obviously need our opening and closing ceremonies. You have to have fundraising pushes. Family stores and hospital hour are big parts of our dance marathon, as well as our silent disco. It's always a fan favorite. So thinking about that participant experience, sorry. Obviously everyone is a part of a fundraising organization, but you have to also think about why are your members coming back to this event? Is it because there's one family story they hear year after year that they really are driven to come back for? Or maybe there's a local band that always performs or some sort of entertainment, whatever it is that's important to your community, identify that and make sure it's accounted for. And then figure out how much time you think it's going to have. So with that, we decided that overall we would have a 10.5-hour dance marathon. But when you think about that, those are just the major components. So you still have to think about transition time. So we ended up having about a 13-hour dance marathon because some of those things like meals and other things like that, that's okay. So Virginia had touched on our fundraising hours and how people were asleep in the middle of the night, so they're not donating to us. So this is just a little chart we pulled. While we were in that committee, we had our finance director at the time pulling lots of numbers in between meetings and looking at, are we really going to be losing money? Because when you think about cutting your marathon in half, obviously the first thing you're going to think is, well, how are we going to hit our goal or raise what we raised last year or in the years past? But Virginia will tell us a little about our results in the coming slides. However, you can just take a look at this graph and obviously see that the nighttime was not a very significant loss based on fundraising per hour. So another thing that we looked at, which was super important to our community, was the changing priorities of our students because your marathon needs to meet the needs of your student body overall. So at the University of Georgia, these are how the priorities have changed. The first is mental health. This is something that has started to be talked about all over the world and how important it is to really be taking care of each other and your mental health and coming to a 24-hour dance marathon where people aren't sleeping or they're sacrificing their studies or their time for a job or people have tests, really a whole variety of things. Students have other commitments. So in a student-run organization, you have to think about the people coming to your event and how you can steward them and take care of them. So keeping them overnight in maybe a gym or in our case, the student center. We had people sleeping on the couches in the hallways, and we were like, okay, this isn't what it needs to be. We need to be looking out for our students more. So we really took those factors into account. And students are very particular about how they're spending their time, which we can all appreciate nowadays, especially as students. So think about and ask your students like what is important to them and how you can adjust your event based on what they need.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some of our results and conclusions. So, our condensed program this year proved to have really successful results, even though we did have some concerns going into the event, and I'll elaborate more on how that worked for us. So we had a fundraising increase. Our fundraising in event increased $79,000 more than it was the year prior. We had a fundraising total of over $274,000, which was awesome. And it also proved the effectiveness of a shorter event in dealing with things like fundraising burnout and people getting tired by the end of it, and also cutting out those unnecessary fundraising hours overnight. So that was a big positive for us. But not only did we have a fundraising increase, but we also had an increase of active fundraisers. We had a 120 active fundraiser increase, which helped us realize that more people were engaged throughout the entirety of the event because even like from the first push to the last push, when we looked at the data, they're about the same number of active fundraisers, which was much higher than last year, which helped us realize that also moving our pushes to a shorter time frame worked really well for our program. So, overall, in our results, we had a higher participant engagement when we are at our main event and we're looking onto the floor, when we're looking at our members. We saw a lot more smiling faces, a lot less people leaving, a lot less people trying to walk out the doors like they were in our previous program model. As I said, we also saw a fundraising increase, which was the main goal of shortening our dance marathon, but also prioritizing our mental health of our participants. We saw a positive experience increase, and which I mentioned earlier with people not wanting to come back for future dance marathons, people being less excited about it after leaving the dance marathon the year prior. This was not an issue this past year as we had a much positive increase with our experiences. So, in conclusion with our event, when we implemented the sprint model to our program, we were able to really successfully create not only a more efficient main event, but one that prioritizes fundraising alongside with member engagement and also with the health and mental health, physical health of our members, which was really successful for our program. So not only was our new 13-hour dance marathon successful, but it was also perceived really well by our members. We got a lot of positive feedback, and we were able to not only maintain tradition, but also make a new tradition of shortening our dance marathon, having new events that people really enjoyed, people really liked, while also keeping some of the same things that everyone loves about UGA Miracle Dance Marathon. So, yeah, thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
If you have any questions, my email is listed below, as well as our social media outlet and our UGA Miracle website, where we share a lot about our program. So if anyone is interested in hearing more or is looking for assistance in shortening your program's event or the sprint model, we'd love to help out. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.